Welcome to the boot camp. As Davey mentioned, I have been through one of these before. So, I do have a degree from college, but it is in chemistry, not programming, which is not what I do now. Did chemistry for a while, didn't particularly like it. A couple years ago, decided to switch to programming, and luckily, boot camps exist. So, but I will say they are very different than your college courses. Obviously, your college courses are spread out over the course of a semester, so there's a lot of downtime, lectures separated by days, possibly, lots of time to do homework, tests, all that sort of stuff. Boot camp's just a very different concept. But the good thing is, it's actually more like what you'll actually use in the workplace. So yeah, definitely a good experience for me. I enjoyed it. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about things that I kind of found after going through it and reflecting back on it, things that I found to be helpful and just tips to get the most out of it. So group participation. Who wants to volunteer to read something? Yes, thank you. Can you read that?
To remain valuable in our economy, therefore, you must master the art of quickly learning complicated things. Cal Newport.
Yes. Is anybody familiar with Cal Newport? You can have a sucker when you participate. So, is anybody familiar with Cal Newport at all? Heard of him? Yeah. So he's a professor, but a lot of what he does is research into the idea of what he calls deep work, basically focusing in on one thing at a time very, very deeply with no distractions, and the kinds of results you can get out of doing that type of work. So if you've not read any of his books or not familiar with him, I would recommend looking into that. I've gotten a lot out of several of his works. But yeah, so you may have noticed, probably a lot of you have not been in the workforce significantly at this point, but things move pretty fast. Like the further we get with technology, the faster things move. So this becomes more and more valuable, the ability to quickly learn new things. And that is especially true in programming. Like for instance, last year for this boot camp, we taught Angular 1. Angular 2 was not even finalized yet. Now they're on Angular 4. Just like tons of frameworks, the rate that new frameworks come out, the rate that languages get updated, all that sort of stuff just gets faster and faster. And so just being able to keep up with that and become proficient at it in a short amount of time becomes a skill in itself. And that's the kind of skills you'll get out of this. So just some expectations about boot camps in general. Also, you'll notice I really like cat pictures. Cats in general. I have one cat. My girlfriend has 3 cats. And then we moved in together, so now we have 4 cats, which even for me is a lot of cats. But yes, there's a lot of cat pictures in my presentation. No, but you know what? I will try to find a way to work that in. Maybe not today, but in some upcoming presentations. So yeah, expectation number 1, it is a lot of hard work. So like I said, the big difference between this and like your normal college courses is there's no real break between it. It's like every day is something new, possibly multiple things that are new. So keeping up with it, paying attention in class, participating, making sure especially that you do the homework, as much of the homework as possible, and pushing yourself as much as possible will help you get the most out of it. You will learn a ton of information in a short amount of time. Like I said, just with 100% focus, you'd be surprised how quickly you can learn something new. And so I hope that's something that you not only get out of this, but then can take with you and apply to other things in your life. Because certainly something I apply to a lot of things now. Another important thing to understand, even though you are learning a lot, it might not feel like it. And that might seem kind of weird when this is all you're doing. But I think there's 2 reasons for that. Number 1, everybody's kind of learning at the same rate. So you're just surrounded by people all day, every day that are learning the same exact thing you are, sitting in on the same classes, doing the same homework. So you don't really have a point of reference outside of this for how much JavaScript you've learned compared to where you were when you came in. So that's something to keep in mind. I don't even remember what point number 2 was, so we're just going to move on. So there are 2 things. I'm sure I'll think of it later. So that's expectations for the course. And so now let's get on to like actual tips for how to get the most out of it.
Before you had an anecdote about not thinking until you went back and looked at what you were doing before.
Yeah, so that wasn't the second point, but that is a good story. So when I was going through the boot camp that I went through, it was a 12-week one, so it is a bit longer than this. But I remember, oh yes, so that does remind me. So that's not the exact point, but so as we were going through, yeah, so point number 2 is as you get further into it, you start to realize how much you still don't know. Like you don't have a perspective on that necessarily coming into it. And so like the more you find out that you don't know stuff, the more you feel like you don't know anything. So yeah, I think it was when I was going through the 12-week boot camp, I got to week 9. So I've been 9 weeks straight of 50 to 60 hours a week of studying and programming and stuff. So it's safe to say I'd learned some things by that point, but I was starting to freak out because I was getting close to time to like actually try to find a job and do this professionally. And I went to my instructor and I was like, man, I don't feel like I've learned anything. And he's like, well, why don't you go back and look at your week 1 homework? And I was like, okay. So I went back and looked at it and you're like, okay, I've learned a few things. We'll be okay. So yeah, just to understand that may be a big thing. You might not feel like you're making progress, but if you ever feel that way, go back and look at your day 1 homework and be like, okay, I definitely know more than I started with. We're good.
Don't necessarily expect that to ever end, because it continues to be true that the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. So, I've been doing this an embarrassingly long time, and I still some days feel like I know absolutely nothing because I'll read some paper or something and think, I hated this. I should not even call myself a professional. I need to apply it.
Yeah, that is very true. Definitely. Like my list of books that I have that I want to read just so I feel like I know what I'm doing just keeps getting longer. Like, I have like a stack of books that I've read over the last year, and if you look at that stack, you're like, oh, he must know a lot about programming. But then like this stack just keeps getting longer because the further you get into it, you're like, oh, there's even more I don't know. But don't get discouraged by that. All right, so tip number 1, you get out what you put in. So also unlike a college course, there are no grades. It is purely up to you how much effort you want to put in.
Don't look at your work.
Oh yeah, we definitely do look at your work. So we'll be monitoring your GitHubs and kind of do an assessment on your progress there. But there's no grades. Like this is more like real life where it's either you can do the job you're expected to do or you can't. And, ultimately that determines your success. But push yourself to do as much of the homework as possible and extend even further if you get done with that. Sometimes it may be a struggle for you, especially, depending on your level of JavaScript coming in. It may be a struggle just to get the basic requirements done, and that's totally fine if that's what the most you can get done. If you find yourself completing things, a lot of times you'll find that we do multiple levels of difficulty on the homework. If you find yourself done with the basic requirements early, you pass technically, but is that really the best thing for you? If you have the ability to push yourself more, definitely do that. And don't underestimate the cumulative effect of extra effort over time. If you put in, let's say today you get your first homework and one of you goes out and you do the basic requirements and the other one goes out and finishes the basic requirements, pushes yourself to do the extra credit, reads a little more after you're done with that. Tomorrow, your knowledge levels are not that much different. But you compound that over 3 weeks, 6 months, a year, and all of a sudden the person who continually puts in effort is way beyond somebody who just does the bare minimum. So a lot of times I get, as I'm sure you'll find Davey talks about a lot, just telling me that I progressed a lot more quickly than most people, and I don't think there's any magic to that. I think it's more just that when you look at it over time, if I spend 1 to 2 hours a day past what's required studying or practicing, that doesn't make much difference in a week, but over a year, that's like 600 extra hours of studying, which if you compare somebody with 600 hours more studying to someone who doesn't have that, that does make a huge difference over time. So don't underestimate that. Also, if you do get totally done with the homework, there is no limit to the amount of stuff that is out there to learn past that. So extra documentation, tutorials, books. If you run out of stuff to do, I have like I said, I personally have a stack of books that I want to read, so I'd be happy to recommend some of those to you. But yeah, there's tons to do, so don't sell yourself short by not pushing yourself. Tip number 2, try to solve the problems yourself. This was a struggle for me initially when I first started learning programming. It's not something you're necessarily used to, and it's really difficult to not want to just like run to Google every 5 seconds and be like, oh, I'll figure out how to do that by Googling the problem. Because when you're working on basic stuff, a lot of times there's just straight up answers for what you're doing. So I'm not saying don't Google things, but I'm saying try to definitely work through things yourself first. A big part of that is learn to break the problem down into its smallest components. So I remember every day when I was going through the boot camp, I would get this like rush of trepidation towards the end of lecture because I knew we'd be talking about what homework we had to do for the day. And when the homework's laid out there, it can be a lot of things. Like can be a pretty big project. And you're just sitting there thinking like, man, I do not know how to go from basically a blank slate to a completed thing. Like there's so many things I don't know how to do between there and here. But when you start breaking it down, so for instance, if I have to make a form where I can submit something and then that something gets displayed on the page and styled, like if I think of that as all one big thing, then it can be overwhelming. If I just think of it like, okay, step 1 is, do I know how to put a text input on the page? Okay, I think I can do that. All right, so I got a text input on the page. Step 2 is, can I submit something from the text input? So break things down into the very smallest pieces and you'll find it's much less intimidating. And again, documentation is always your best friend. Tip number 3, don't stay stuck for too long. So we cover a lot of stuff, so don't stay stuck for forever. Once I got past the initial trepidation of, getting myself to the point where I was trying to solve things myself, I actually might have gone too far the opposite direction and like never asked for help. And sometimes I would spend like an hour or 2 on something that ended up being a ridiculously simple thing where somebody with some different perspective could just look at it and be like, oh yeah, you have a semicolon in the wrong place or something, So it wasn't something that was like a problem with my programming. It's just something simple that was I was stuck on. So make sure you don't stay stuck on any one thing too long. So a general rule of thumb, if you have broken the problem down, you've read related documentation, you have Googled it, and you've also spent 15 minutes or so on it, that's about the time where I would ask somebody. So like Davey mentioned, we're available on Slack. It may not be an immediate response, but we certainly try to, especially if it's, for you guys in the afternoon, you have the room next door to be working on stuff. So a lot of times while Davey or I are lecturing, if the other one of us, if you send us a message over Slack, we can either answer through Slack if it's something that can be resolved that way, or we can pop over there and help you out with that. So, but yeah, if you've done these steps, by all means, ask for some help, whether that's from us or from other people in your class. A lot of times, if you're stuck, that doesn't mean somebody else is, or you can come up with different ideas together. Tip number 4, learn from our mistakes. So this was might be the single biggest thing I got out of boot camp, was going to a place where the instructor was a professional who had done this for many, many years, and seeing them code, and not only that, but seeing that their code did not always work initially. That was very helpful to me to see somebody with that much experience and knowledge not do something right the first time, because it's like, okay, it's okay for me to make mistakes as well. And then as part of that, how do they go about resolving it is really the biggest thing. So yeah, when we screw up, not even if, when we screw up, pay attention to how those problems are resolved. It's a combination of learning how to read error messages, general troubleshooting process, using the developer tools. So there's a lot of stuff built into browsers and JavaScript in general that can help you debug things. And then again, leveraging the documentation. Like I said, has anybody done like tutorials, just like online tutorials, or you've all been through like Codecademy and stuff. The biggest thing for me was like when I was going through that initially to learn stuff, that's like you're just seeing the final product. You know, it's like they go straight through and everything works perfectly. I mean, there might be some very minor mistakes in there, but that was such a big roadblock for me for a long time, is thinking like, oh my God, if I can't go through and just like immediately produce this, then I'm the worst coder ever. Not the case. Don't worry about that. Watch us make mistakes and learn from them. Don't compare yourself to others. You know, when we went around the room initially, it was pretty obvious that some people have experience with this or related things and some people don't, and that's perfectly fine. But what you don't want to do is compare yourself directly to someone else, because you don't know what their level of experience is. Not only that, but everyone will find different concepts difficult. And just focus on your own personal improvement, not comparison to other people. Also, just a side note, I meant to add a slide in for this, but one of the things, the quotes that helped me the most in learning programming was believe in the power of eventually. And by that I mean believe that if you're up against something that is very difficult, believe that if you keep working at it, you will eventually get it. So like for instance, last year, Davey had asked me, it was actually right after the boot camp that I came out of. I didn't learn JavaScript in the boot camp. It was Rails and Ruby. And he asked if I wanted to help teach the JavaScript thing. I was like, that'd be cool. You know, because the biggest thing is learning your first language pretty well, and then other ones you can generally pick up pretty quick. And it was going pretty well, but we got a little ways into it, and we started talking about, asynchronous stuff and promises, which is not something you deal with a lot in Ruby. And for me, it was like, I just wasn't getting it, to be honest. And I'm like, I'm here supposed to be like helping teach, and like I just literally don't get this stuff. And I just had to keep reading it, and every night I would read a couple of blog posts or some documentation about promises, and I just kept not getting it. It probably took about 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden everything clicked, and I've been fine with that ever since. But you just got to believe that if you keep working at it, you will eventually get it. And same thing if you're trying to figure out a way to do something in a program and you're just not getting it. Just keep trying different stuff and believe that eventually you'll get it.
I'd like to add something.
Yeah.
So keep in mind, as far as different people learning at a different pace, not only remember that if you're feeling behind, remember that if you're feeling ahead. And if someone asks you a question, tempted to be condescending or treat them like an idiot, remember that everything you do know, you used to not know. And it's okay that people don't know it yet, that's why we're here. And if you do have the inclination to be a know-it-all, I'll just tell you right now, we're all very impressed. So you have nothing to prove, we already know, and we're already very impressed, so there's no need to slow down class to show off how much you already know. Deal? Deal, Andy? Hey.
All right. Last but not least, have fun. It really is a fun process. Like I said, it can be a little bit disheartening because every day you're running against more and more things that you don't know. But celebrate your wins when you do get stuff to work or when you learn something new. Take a moment to appreciate that. Make some friends. Going through an experience like this can be a really good time. It's a very intensive experience, and you end up spending a lot of time with the same people. One of the guys I went through a boot camp with, we still stay in touch all the time. Honestly, most weekends we do screen sharing and do remote pair programming. I mean, it's just, you can really get some good friends out of this and build cool stuff. And finally, you can do it. Believe in yourself as I believe in you. The end. Any questions about boot camp in general? Yeah.
What boot camp did you go through?
It was, yeah, it was the Iron Yard. I see you have the sticker.
Cool.
Yeah. How are you familiar with them?
They came to campus, and we're talking about how they have boot camps and stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
I've been interested in looking into them as well, just because, I'm going to college for CS, but I feel like the way that we're taught is so haphazard,
Mm-hmm.
and I really wanted to go through, from start to finish on one programming language.
Mm-hmm.
I was very interested in them, so.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely merits to both. you know, like I said, my degree's in chemistry, so nothing computer science related other than just like obviously the underlying math and science classes. So for me, I'm kind of coming from the opposite direction. I've gone through a boot camp, and now I'm like reading the computer science textbooks because I mean, there's advantage to knowing both sides of it, having a really good understanding of algorithms and design and all that sort of stuff. And then there's also, like I said, in your day to day, honestly, it's going to be more like a boot camp where you just have to get up to speed and productive in a particular programming language or framework as quickly as possible and stay up to date with it. So I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. I think it's great to kind of have both types of experience. So it's
I do
good.
have a computer science degree, and I can tell you if I hadn't been doing stuff on the side, I would have probably graduated not having any idea how to do an actual job. So, you know, at that time, like Mike, it's been a while, but like they never acknowledged that the web was even a thing really in my computer science curriculum. But I was already doing some of that stuff, so I just continued to do it on the side. Building stuff sometimes for people who would actually hire me, and sometimes just like redesigning my own site just to get practice in, and that was really valuable for me. So I did graduate, got my job really just because I had a computer science degree, but it was doing web stuff, and I wouldn't have known how to do any of that stuff had I not been doing it on my own. So I do recommend that, and I think boot camps do it.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
That being said, like, do you guys feel like you have the imposter syndrome? Like, I feel like,
Yes.
I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. And some days I'm thinking to myself, like, what am I doing here? I don't think I belong. So I don't know if that ever goes away.
No.
That's the short version. But you can learn to deal with it and learn to let it help motivate you instead of paralyze you. I mean, that's the trick for me, is to make sure I keep moving.
Is everybody familiar with that term, imposter syndrome?
Basically, what I described slightly earlier, feeling like, my gosh, I'm a fraud. They're going to find out any day now. I don't actually know anything. And a lot of people feel that way. Now, there are people who actually don't know anything. But you know, generally that's not what we're talking about. It is common to feel like you're way behind where you ought to be. And one thing I'll say about that, just from a reality check perspective, you're aware of everything that you don't know. You're not aware of how much other people don't know. Because they're talking about the things they know about, right? They don't talk about the gaps. And so you just assume those gaps aren't there because they talk about some things that you don't know about. But you probably know something that they don't, and they probably worry about that same thing. So keep in mind that you have a unique perspective on yourself, and you know exactly what you're missing.
Yeah, I would say
Be harder on yourself.
with the work that we do outside of teaching, a lot of times we do project or like staff augmentation work. And I can tell you, even after doing it for a while, every time like we are going to start with a new contract or a new team, I'm like, okay, but this team is going to figure out I don't know anything, right? I've managed to fool everybody up until this point, but these people are going to figure it out, you know? So I think what it comes down to is it never really goes away, but you start to see from your own history and look back and be like, okay, I've got a track record of like 8 or 9 projects I've been on and everything worked out fine. Like I'll probably be okay on this one too, you know? So it doesn't go away, but you can definitely learn to mitigate it more. And don't let that stay in your, stand in your way of doing what you want to do. All right. Any other thoughts?